Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joe Emilio Show. Tonight is going to be a very interesting night as I have three guests on the show, one of which hopefully will join us in just a little bit. He's running a bit late, but I have with me at the moment Dumo and Mark Oppenheimer. Say hi, guys.
How you
How's
doing?
this?
How you doing?
um, it's good to have you guys back on the show. Now, this show might run for an hour and a half because obviously, when there's a panel, I want to try and give everyone a chance to speak. And I think we're going to be talking about something quite important tonight. And I'm definitely going to start with Mark Oppenheimer because he does have to leave at 10 p.m. And I do want to talk a lot about maybe the constitutional side of things that is going on at the moment with South Africa. But before I do, and before I get to that, I have to address Debbie Oliver giving 140 Rand super chat. She didn't say anything, even though it's a super chat, but she gave 140 Rand. Thank you so much, Deborah Oliver, for your contribution. That reminds me, ladies and gentlemen, if you have an important question that you want to ask any one of the guests tonight, please use the super chat function. It does go a long way to helping the channel grow and supporting the channel, as well as I, by YouTube law, have to address it. I have to. Otherwise, I get nothing happens if I don't. But I mean, I just have to. All right, cool. So, Mark, let's start with you, my friend, because okay. So let me actually preface this conversation. Okay, at the moment, as we all know, and unless you live on a rock or under a rock, South Africa is going through a bit of turmoil at the moment. These are riots and looting that we haven't seen since the apartheid times, and some say maybe even worse than that. A lot has been going on. There's a lot of information getting out there. It has now today seems to be the word around the water cooler, if I can put it that way, is that there might be some kind of Team Zuma, basically trying to orchestrate something. There's rumors like that going around. There's rumors about this is all for elections. This is to make Cyril look bad. There's rumors of basically they want a state of emergency. That's another one that's coming up that seems to be quite popular as well. And then there is also a coup that might be happening. So we're going to talk about all four of those theories and what is maybe the more plausible one. But I'm going to start with Mark Oppenheimer by asking you, and let's start with state of emergency. I think let's start with that one. Mark, what do you think? Because here's my theory on that. Okay, I think that it is true that, or some truth to it, rather, I should say, that the ANC does want a sort of state of emergency because it gives them unprecedented power during this time. And something Koketso said last night to me is that during a state of emergency, there will be no elections, thus keeping ANC in power. Your thoughts?
Okay, so I suppose there's two separate questions. The first is what is the likelihood of a state of emergency? The other one is what would happen if one was declared. So let's let's start off by saying that there have been calls from people to institute a state of emergency. Vusi Pikoli and Demiso Nzabeza have both said that a state of emergency should be called. Now, I think you can recognize that we are in an emergency situation. In other words, it is a terrible state of affairs that we find ourselves in, that you have mass violence, rioting, looting, and that is clearly an emergency. It's a separate question whether you should take the legal step to declare a state of emergency. Now, what a state of emergency would do, we've been used to living under a state of disaster now for the last year and a half. State of emergencies are different in a couple of ways. The one feature of them is that it has to be done through an act of parliament, whereas our state of disaster has really been done by the Corona Council producing regulations kind of by fiat very quickly and without parliamentary approval. So here you would have parliamentary oversight. The Constitution regulates it. It says that you can declare a state of emergency for 21 days unless Parliament agrees to extend it. And the dangerous part of a state of emergency is that you can limit the rights in the Bill of Rights. But any limitation on those rights is only allowed if it's strictly necessary to address the emergency. Now, there are also only certain circumstances in which you can declare a state of emergency. Insurrection is one, disorder is another. I think we do find ourselves in those situations. So the question, of course, to be asked for those that are calling for a state of emergency is which rights in the Bill of Rights are a problem for addressing this situation. Which rights would you like to do away with? So there's some the Constitution says you can't do away with. So, for example, we have a right to life. You cannot just introduce the death penalty now because you'll find yourself in a state of emergency. The Constitution wouldn't allow it. You can restrict certain kinds of other rights, like the ability to detain someone without trial. You can restrict people's free speech rights and their privacy rights. So that should be a serious worry. Those rights, there are no limitations on how you can limit them, barring that it's got to be strictly necessary for the emergency. But you can imagine, a heavy-handed government saying, well, we're quite concerned about misinformation going on, and so no one is allowed to report at all on anything that's happening on the ground because we think that would cause chaos and confusion. And anybody caught reporting what's going on the ground will be immediately imprisoned without trial, because we took away your trial rights. So those are the kinds of concerns.
I just want to add as well to that, like we've seen this in certain countries that have gone through this. This is not unheard of. If there's anybody listening to this that thinks like, oh, they're never going to do that. No. Countries have done that. In Nigeria, trying to get rid of Twitter not too long ago, shutting it down. So yeah, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to emphasize on that point.
Yeah, exactly. So in other words, if you look at our Bill of Rights, you mentioned elections. So, Section 19 is about our political rights. And it says in 19.2, every citizen has the right to free, fair, and regular elections. So there's an argument that you could then remove that. Now, it's not totally straightforward on that front because there are other sections of the Constitution that mandate elections and say you must have an election every 5 years, and there's a 90-day window you're entitled to have. You've also got to explain why not having an election is strictly necessary for addressing the particular emergency. Now, our elections, I think, have to happen by the end of October, in terms of the last set of elections. There are, of course, municipal elections as well. So it's not like you could oust the president through these elections. You could oust the mayors, through an election process. And it's not clear to me that because the obligation on the IEC to hold these elections is not found in the Bill of Rights, it's found later in the Constitution. It's not clear the state of emergency could get around that. It would be unprecedented. We've never declared a state of emergency in democratic South Africa. Of course, when people think of states of emergency in South Africa, they think about the 80s and they think about P.W. Botha. So it's not clear to me that it's in the ANC's interest to do it. And I think that's why there is some reluctance. So despite the fact that there have been calls for a state of emergency from prominent people, government's view is not yet. Because I think it's, in some hand, it doesn't play into your political futures very well. You basically say, we've had to declare a state of emergency, we've lost control of the country. That doesn't sit very well. I don't think that's good for the ANC to sort of have to do that. And because there's all these negative connotations as well. People, remember this idea of these states of emergencies. I mean, we do have lots of features of it anyway. We have a 9 o'clock curfew. It's now 10 minutes past curfew. That is a very strange world to be living in, but we've just gotten used to it because of our states of disaster. We had 2,500 soldiers that were deployed, and I think that's been extended now to 25,000. So you've got army on the streets. That already looks like a state of emergency.
Yeah.
But you've kept the rights in our Bill of Rights. So as I say, for those that are calling for it, I want to know which rights in the Bill of Rights are getting in the way of addressing the mob. What are the things that you think we need to have this power to do it? I'm sure some of you saw this statement saying that what the army is going to be doing is telling all those citizens who are protecting their communities and setting up blockades that it's unlawful there for them to have done that and they must dismantle their blockades. Now, if that doesn't send shivers down your spine, we are clearly in a failing state situation where the police are saying, we don't have enough ammo to protect against these mobs. And they were calling on citizens to assist. And now what? The army's going to bring it under control? It's not clear they're doing a good job on that front. So instead of having the easy hanging fruit of, hey, you guys have a blockade, why don't you focus on the guys that are busy burning things down, destroying the economy, destroying lives? I mean, I think the official death rate is around 70, but I gather that many more people may have died that aren't being reported upon. And that's a horrifying thing. I mean, BBC had an image of a Mother in a burning building throwing her baby off the building because she thought the
Mm.
baby would burn alive and praying that the crowd would catch her baby. That's international news. The rand is plummeting. This is not a good state of affairs. And it's not like we're seeing very effective leadership on this front.
Mm. Now, Mark, you bring up some good points. I mean, like I said earlier, I had a theory that this is what the ANC wants. But now that you bring up these points, I'm starting to rethink my position. Duma, let's go to you. Your thoughts on this theory?
On the government wants the state of emergency.
Yes.
Well, I don't know what I don't know if, okay, based on the theory that I have, right? I don't think the state of emergency is necessary for the NDR. I think, given the nature of the National Democratic Revolution and what the ANC wants, it seems that the riots and everything is fitting right into their plan. And I'll tell you why. Because if more shops are looted, if key supply chain points are also destroyed, it gives the government a good opportunity to actually allow the destruction to occur and then step in at the right time and say, okay, let's rebuild. So a lot of people will be unemployed, and if they are unemployed and businesses are done for, then the government has got a larger pool of people to make them reliable on some sort of welfare. So I think, I don't know if they will need to implement the state of emergency, but definitely from what I have experienced and what I've seen, it seems that the climate is correct for the ANC to kind of like drag their feet on this issue and
Mm.
give off to give the impression off to the public, rather, that we're doing everything we can, and knowing very well that that is not the case. So I think state of emergency is not necessary for the NDR, but definitely how things are going right now, as Mark said, it's not a good state of affairs. It's perfect for them to intervene and to rebuild, build back better, as Boris Johnson would say, or or have a new dawn, or new dawn 2, or something like that, or new dawn 1.1.5. I don't know.
This
Whatever you want
summer,
to call
New
it.
Dawn is coming for your ass. Red Dawn is here.
Oh man, yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
The first one failed.
That's like the worst movie trailer ever. Um, I gotta say, very quickly as well, thank you all so much who are listening and tuning in and engaging in the live chat. I am keeping an eye on some of the comments that are coming through. Big Daddy Liberty is on his way. I just got a message. He said he's sorry he's running a bit late, but he will be joining us shortly. Leanne Pietra saying hi, all great stream. Marlene saying great stream. Robin Dandelion saying the government is doing everything in their power not to help. And Ruan Vandervalt saying it's a reset, just like commies like it. I think we would all agree with that to some extent. So yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, let me also say that if you want to follow these guys, especially on their YouTube channels, I have linked each one's YouTube channel in the description below. Mark Oppenheimer is not a guest, sorry. Really mincing my words there. Mark Oppenheimer is a co-host on the channel. I know it has the word brain in it. Yeah. And Dumo is obviously the main host of Man Patriot, and Big Daddy Liberty is also linked in the comments or description below. All right. So I will follow up with Big Daddy Liberty in just a moment. But yeah, I think this puts the whole state of emergency theory. I mean, I still feel like, Mark, you made a good point. It's not exactly what they want, but I mean, they're very hesitant to do it. But at the same time, it's not impossible, correct? It's not out of the realm of possibility.
No, it's not out of the realm of possibility. As I said, we'd have to pass. You've got to get 60% of Parliament to agree to it.
Yeah.
So the question is whether they would get the votes. You might have internal rankings within the ANC as to whether they want it. So they, and whether they could get support from other parties or not. And as I say, you've got to ask yourself, what rights do you need to remove in order to quell the emergency? And also bear in mind we're in this very unusual situation where we have the disaster regs. So in other words, you have things like curfews, If you the kinds of things that you might have implemented without COVID, maybe you needed to go and have some special state of affairs for it. It's not clear to me that the disaster management rules could be aimed at this, because it's not a natural disaster like, let's say, a disease or a flood.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure what more they would need, and I think that's got to be spelled out. I think, as I say, people might be sympathetic because they recognize this is an emergency, but a state of emergency is a very particular thing, and a quite dangerous thing to introduce. The worry with these things is once you start to erode a rights culture, it's quite hard to claw those rights back. The other thing I think we should talk about is, how did we get here? And there is a very particular person who our president hasn't named, Jacob Zuma, and that's an astonishing thing. In other words, you have the former president of this country sent to jail because he defied a constitutional court order. And you had the constitutional court speaking in very clear terms that if people feel free to disobey the orders of courts, then the Constitution isn't worth the paper it's written on. And, you have this crazy crisis moment where Zuma, after being told to appear at the court, refuses to, tells the Constitutional Court that he'll be the first prisoner of the Constitutional Court. They then sentence him to 15 months in jail, tell him he has to hand himself over, and he doesn't. He's in contempt of that order as well. He refuses to hand himself over within the 5 days. The Minister of Police now is sort of unsure as what to do. It becomes evident that they have to comply within 3 days to arrest him, and they do, but really 20 minutes before their final deadline. And then you have this eruption of violence, and it's very clear that this is, at least in part, sparked by Zuma and Zuma associates, sort of saying this great injustice has befallen our leader, and people need to rise up and do something about it. And then, of course, this bizarre situation where the EFF say that if soldiers are deployed, that they will, join in on the violence. And this is, a party that basically made its name by being an anti-Zuma organization, by screaming in Parliament, pay back the money. Of course, Julius Malema, when he was, in the ANC Youth League, said that he would die for Zuma. So, clearly has a conflicted relationship with his former Ubaba. Yeah, there's an interesting story to unpack here. But I do think that, Jimmy Manya, who's running that Friends of Jacob Zuma organization, I think had said something along the lines of, there cannot be peace until we have justice for Jacob. That kind of speech under these circumstances is not protected speech. And Manya has a sort of history of skirting a line on these sort of things. And you've also seen, comments made from Julius Malema, as I say, and from other children in the Zuma family. If you're stoking the flames of a violent mob, you are responsible for that. The Writers' Assemblies Act says that if you incite people to commit crimes, you are liable for those crimes. That act has been tested by the Constitutional Court and found to be constitutionally valid. The EFF know that. So, really, I think one way of quelling the violence is to go and arrest those people that are calling for more acts of violence, and start making some high-level examples.
Excellent point. And before we digest that, ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Liberty has joined us tonight. Thank you, Big Daddy Liberty, for joining in on the stream. And I know that a lot of people also like your take on what we're talking about. And just to bring you up to speed, there's a few theories that we're going to talk about tonight. One being ANC wants a state of emergency. The other one being, KZN wants to secede. There's another theory that there's maybe this is all about elections and it's all to make Cyril look bad and perhaps create basically a vote of no confidence and get someone else in power in ANC. And then there's also the theory of a coup that is being, done here. And we're right now tackling the theory of ANC wants a state of emergency. And Mark Oppenheimer has just explained, what needs to happen in order for a state of emergency to actually be in effect, and that it actually may not be a good idea for the ANC to do it because it shows that they actually don't have any control over the country, and it actually doesn't look good for the ANC to have a state of emergency, which is why they've been hesitant. And we just also, you were part of the conversation in the studio of Mark also bringing up the points that he laid out now. about Cyril, being very quiet about the Zuma spark that happened earlier this week. And I do believe that was a spark to the powder keg that has been building for years. So, yeah, your thoughts, Big Daddy.
Yeah. Firstly, hello everybody, and shout out to Joe's viewers out there. I made mention of a similar point on my show. One shouldn't feel too trapped in having to pick a side or a layer of analysis. Multiple things can be true at the same time. All of these things can be playing out right now and there's become a sort of weird confluence and almost a perfect storm of these things coming together in a rather toxic way, toxic for the rest of us, law-abiding citizens at least. But I do think there's definitely credence to the argument that there may be some circles within the ANC that want a state of emergency, but it wouldn't be the winning faction of it, or the winners faction of it. It would be the disaffected, the coalition of the wounded, who would do exactly that, right? They want a state of emergency to then make the argument that look at your Cyril, he cannot even keep control of the levels of government, let alone the security forces, because there has been a sort of grinding out of that angle right now. For example, when people questioning where is the army, where are the police right now, and there's this narrative developing that we're not seeing the similar levels of sort of pervasive on every corner of the street levels of army and police, because as the argument goes by his detractors, the police are just not with him, and the army is just not with him. This is an argument you're seeing develop right now by the Zuma camp. So I'll be interested to hear more thoughts from everybody else, but I'm of the view generally, and I'll make the argument tonight, that a lot of these arguments can all be true at the same time, and they play each other out in different iterations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm also starting to feel that way, but I'll also give a bit of my own opinion as well. All right, so going back to what Mark said earlier about Zuma and that whole scenario, I think maybe it's a sore topic. We know that Cyril and Zuma have not liked each other very much. Although I find that also hard to believe. It's getting to the point where it's almost you don't know what to believe anymore, because Cyril was deputy president for Zuma for a very long time. And people seem to have forgotten that. I don't know. Maybe Cyril was very quiet in the background during the Zuma years. But people forget about that. This guy was alongside Zuma, corrupting and stealing from the people the entire time. But anyway, let's also try and move on because there's, like I said, there's other theories to get to, and I really want to. I think this would be a good opportunity to bring this one in because we're kind of talking about it right now. Is the election side of things. So what I've noticed, okay, and I'm going to bring up two very important points here. What has been really itching me and bothering me is the meetings with Juju and Zuma and Tsele and Zuma. Happened a few months ago. But people seem to have kind of forgotten. It's coming up now on social media. People are starting to remember. And that really doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me. And it makes me think that maybe this is to do with the elections. I mean, we saw similar footage and scenes when it was the American elections and people were rioting and burning down buildings. Not the same narrative, completely different narrative, but similar, very similar images and footage were being shared. And, some would say that it worked, that Trump, Biden took over. And I don't know, I kind of feel that maybe this is kind of the same play where we're seeing Team Zuma, if I can put it that way, trying to make Cyril look really bad in the upcoming elections. Your guys' thoughts on that? Let's start with Dumo.
Wow. That's a very interesting theory. But it's also plausible as well, given the fact that Dele did meet Zuma and also Malema also met Zuma as well. I feel that also with the meeting between Malema and Zuma, I felt that was more of a move by Malema to actually promote the EFF. I don't know if you've seen over the past few months, as Mark mentioned, that he has been flip-flopping on Zuma. So it seems that whenever the political tide is in favor of Zuma, he will side with him. And if it's against Zuma, he will actually go against Zuma. So I think that now with Malema, what has happened is that he has seen that there's this coalition within the ANC that's anti-Ramaphosa. And, he's trying to capture that vote from the ANC and bring it over to the EFF, which I think is the case, because you could see one of the images, he was actually shaking Zuma's hand as if to say that Zuma actually endorses the EFF. So I think it could be a ploy by the EFF and the herd faction of the ANC to make Ramaphosa look bad. But at the same time, I also feel that the EFF are trying to take advantage of this factional battle so that they can actually get votes. And I think the EFF are, I wouldn't say they are losing power, but I think they feel that they're losing a lot of relevance. So they need to stay relevant all the time. And I think that's why you even saw Malema making comments about no army people, no army militia or whatever on the streets. But he's only saying that because if Ramaphosa announces it, then it's against Ramaphosa. Therefore, he can actually gain more support from that broken coalition. So yeah, it could be a way to make Ramaphosa look bad. But yeah, at the same time, I think the EFF is trying to capture it. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Before I go on to Mark, I just want to address some of the comments. Like I said, if you give a super chat by YouTube law, I have to address it. Yanni Vanderfault saying, or giving 140 Rand super chat. Thank you so much, Yanni. And saying, good job, Fantastic Four. Interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Yanni Vanderfault. And then just some interesting or some comments coming in. Koketso, thank you, buddy, for tuning in. Far easier to fix new problems instead of existing ones, I guess. That's some truth to that. Robin saying a lot of theories. Each one has a bit of truth to that, as Big Daddy Liberty also mentioned. And yeah, that's some of the interesting comments that are coming in so far. All right, so Mark, your take on perhaps maybe this is all to make Cyril look bad for elections.
I think you've got to distinguish between things that are planned. In other words, you've got a cabal of people sitting in a room coming up with some kind of strategy versus a situation which arises. Now, I think the situation does make Cyril look bad. It's a separate question as to whether people have a grand plan for that to occur. I suppose one of the views that's been floating around is that South African Secret Service people who were loyal to Zuma have been playing a role in this process, and so there's clearly a political element there. And I think it's not totally nuts to think that you've got a disaffected portion of the ANC who's been sidelined, guys like Ace, who sort of feel like, well, now is our chance. We can either create the chaos or take advantage of the chaos, and so that's not a thing to be discounted. But I think with any kind of conspiratorial thinking, you've got to think about other ways in which this could be arising. One is which basically is you have chaos, and out of that, various things are emerging, and people are just being opportunistic in the circumstances. It's clear to me that there are lots of opportunistic criminals, for example, who are saying it's a very good time to go and hire a bunch of trucks so that you can go and raid some stores because you'll be able to get away with it. It's an unprecedented gold rush, so take advantage. Doesn't mean that those people pre-planned this. They saw a situation arise and they're taking advantage of it. So on the elections front, so the EFF had called for a postponement of these elections earlier in the year on COVID grounds. The sort of line was, it's not safe for people to gather together and vote. Now, the only way that you could stop that would be to change the constitution, because the constitution specifically talks about having these 5-year terms. And what it says is that those elected councils, their terms expire. So it might be that through your state of emergency, you say people lose their rights to participate in free and fair elections. But you can't go and change through a state of emergency the expiry of those councils. So you could have a situation where suddenly there is no government at the municipal level. And so all of those mayors dissolve. because you haven't had another election. Now, there's a requirement that you're supposed to have an election within 90 days. But if you don't do it, the expiry occurs. So that's one way to sort of find out what life would be like without government. I imagine in many of these small towns, you wouldn't notice a difference. I think many of those towns, maybe things would get better. You'd have less people, looting and stealing because their hands suddenly can't be close to the till anymore. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting opportunity. As I say, crises create opportunities, and of course, those that tend to take advantage are often those with very ill wills. And government often takes that sort of opportunity to kind of expand its powers. But it is an opportunity now. I mean, one of the things that's been quite heartwarming about this is seeing ordinary citizens put their lives on the line to go and protect not just their own property, but other people's property. And seeing the role of civic action, of communities coming together, and that's quite an inspiring thing. There is some sense in which our state has been failing for a long time, and it's important that those that love the country and love liberty, are willing to stand up and protect it, and that is a very emboldening thing. Something I'd like to ask Sikler, which is there's a sort of question as to how much of this is ethnically motivated violence. Do you have a view on that? Is this sort of like, Zulu nationalists who feel that they've been sidelined and this is an opportunity? Is that bogus?
I think it is a little bit bogus, but there is a ongoing debate around who owns Zulu nationalism. So historically, the IFP has always tried to appropriate those deeply nationalistic senses of Zulus who owe a fealty to the king and the institution of the king, not just who the king may be, but actually the institution of the Kingdom of KwaZulu. Historically, the IFP has appropriated that brand rather successfully and infused it historically with a sort of I'm going to struggle to be succinct here. So let me put it this way: it's historically infused it with a purpose in a modern political sense. The purpose being, along with Zulu nationalism, is a market economy, a focus on education, a focus on institutions, building institutions that endure over generations, that are aimed at serving Zulu people. So there's a battle for the soul of that Zulu nationalism, where the IFP, is trying to reassert that identity, and it's facing an ANC which has since about 2000 really, which is when I think I'm right, since about 2000 when the ANC started to sort of really ascend in KZN, has been struggling to win back, has been struggling to redefine through a Marxist or a socialist lens, that's the battle you're actually seeing wage itself out now. Now, it doesn't wage itself out in these lofty terms that I'm using, right? At its most simple and crude sense, it's just, I have yellow t-shirts, I have white t-shirts, let's meet each other on the streets. It's crude, it plays itself out in that sense in a real term. But where it gets a little sophisticated, if you pay attention, is those remnants of an older generation of Zulu KZN residents who still remember the KZN of an IFP and still see the institution that still stands to this day as being akin to that sense of Zulu nationalism, and who look at today's generation and kind of go, what's this? Like, what is this nonsense? Like, it's aimless, it's angry, it's cross, it's materialistic, and really it's consumptive in nature. It doesn't have that old value of you build a nation, i.e. a Zulu nation, and you build institutions that benefit generations in perpetuity. So I know that sounds like a very convoluted way of answering your question, but it's simply this. What you saw recently was the latest salvo in that attempt to own Zulu nationalism by the Zuma camp in particular. They played up that quite shockingly. I seem to be frozen. I come back. They played up that identity quite spectacularly, and so it even shocked those of us who are more traditional. Even the Zulu king and the prime minister of the Zulu nation are like, why, for example, are we seeing the nation's regiments coalescing around Jacob Zuma when historically they've been non-partisan at all? They owe fealty to the king, not to any government of the day. So that's the debate I see raging at the moment. And what you're seeing as a last gasp, and something I think will be interesting to keep an eye on, is a growing strength in the call for secession by those quarters who historically never called for it. Why? Because they were still part of the patronage network of, coming out of Pretoria via Jacob Zuma. Suddenly now there's an impetus by that quarter, which happens to have a loud voice and representation in popular Zulu culture and media, in particular Zulu culture media. They suddenly are calling for secession, and this debate is beginning to rage on. So it's interesting to hear it come from their perspective, but its reasoning is flawed, although the basis of why they're calling for it is flawed. For example, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, back in the day, I used to be a kid, and my uncles would take me to his speeches in Stanger for Shaga's Day celebrations, and he used to talk a lot about the concept of Inkululeko Yokugcina, the final freedom, and he would say that we as Zulus have not achieved the final freedom. That final freedom is basically those tenets I spoke about: market economy, distinct Zulu identity, self-governance in that part of the world, all the things that a modern libertarian will be like, yeah, this is great stuff, and which was lost over the years, and that would be my 2 cents on that. But right now, don't be dribbled. Like the Zulu nationalism, that no one owns it, so to speak. It's still sort of in the air, kind of speak. But the day will come where I think an almost strong man of sorts will claim it and push it in a particular direction that sucks up the vast majority of us Zulus, who don't think is a monolith, by the way. Don't understand Zulu nationalism as some sort of monolithic thought pattern. People are very much quite happy to be like individuals, and more specifically clans being akin to families. But someone will be able to organize it one day, and I look forward to that. I wonder what it would look like.
An interesting take, and a very important one at that. Thank you, Sikhle, and Mark. Brilliant question, and one that I don't see a lot of the mainstream media touching on or even tackling. And I think that's an important part of what is happening currently in South Africa. But Sikhle, as well, your thoughts on is this to make Cyril look bad? Do you think there is this war in the ANC, so to speak, and it's boiled over into the streets?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll always begin every response by saying, look, it's a bit of everything to an extent, and I think what we've found ourselves in is this odd perfect storm that has blown up in everybody's face. In fact, some of them are actually quite surprised, like, oh, this is more successful than we thought it would be, But yes, insofar as those who saw this as an opportunity to make Cyril look bad, especially ahead of local government elections, of course, it was about making him look bad. But the problem is there's collateral damage, man. South Africans are at a point where the ANC, people are starting to call out the ANC as the problem. So they're not going to make the distinction between, Zuma's ANC and that faction, broadly calling itself the Radical Economic Transformation faction. They're not going to make a distinction between that and the so-called CR17 faction, or the Cyril Ramaphosa faction. I think the ANC is finding itself in a bit of a pickle right now. And you saw this in particular when the response to Sikhe Zikalala, who's the premier of KwaZulu-Natal, the response to him and his almost mealy-mouthed approach to the chaos and the violence, it seemed to me that the ordinary South African, who I like to broadly characterize as being God-fearing, law-abiding by and large, and family-orientated, that South African who was racked with fear, watching the surroundings sort of crumble around them by hordes of these mobs that were whipped up by politicians, that South African took exception to the who lived in KZN at least, took exception to the premier of the province, on the one hand endorsing this idea that Zuma is some victim who needs to be released on some political arrangement, and number two, seemingly at the same time tacitly arguing that what we're seeing therefore on the streets is justified because of Zuma's position. Like, there were people, like KZN residents were like, what the fudge did we just hear this premier say when we are currently under siege as various communities across the country? To the point where, as a final thought, even when the usual race hustlers started interjecting to try and run interference for their beloved Galala, it didn't work because they were starting to pull the narrative, for example, of, oh, look at those whites defending their community. How dare they? You know, they're shooting blacks, they said. And people are like, no. A lot of black South Africans in particular are like, no. The same thing is happening in black communities where people have taken charge of defending their neighborhoods. They are stopping cars, searching them, looking for looted goods. Don't apply a double standard just because so-called white South Africans are doing the same for their neighborhoods. So they pivoted, right? They noticed that they're losing that one, and they pivoted to where there's a bit more graphic stuff happening, which is the Indian communities. And I must be frank, there have been some very graphic and violent clashes especially in Phoenix, which is just north of Durban, and Chatsworth, south of Durban, both large Indian populations, where again, Indian residents have rightly taken charge of their communities and said, no, there will be no looting here, we'll defend it. And a lot of them happen to be well-armed residents, and there have, of course, been clashes and people have died. So they pivoted to that, and they played the Malema rhetoric, because Malema has introduced this notion that Indians are akin to being white and whiteness, and, you know, they are racist. He's always said, you know, Indians are racist, they look at how they're killing Africans in these parts of the world. And again, the pushback has been, well, look, if you're going to find yourself, why is there no condemnation about the violence meted against them, where some of the looters are actually targeting minority communities? So there's that weird debate going on where I think the ANC recognizes that it's losing the propaganda war to an extent, and some people are beginning to ask hard questions of whether is not what we're seeing right now actually a function of the ANC and not just a Cyril or a Zuma faction. So that's an interesting one. I want to see how it plays out.
Yeah, excellent. I think also, like, I got some feedback from Franz Cornier from RRR, and you know, he spoke to me about a rabbit theory. He calls it a rabbit theory, which is basically Cyril Ramaphosa faction. They are trying to steer the narrative away from everything being Cyril's fault. So they're starting to create this narrative that, oh no, it's Zuma's team or Team Zuma. There's intelligence that's telling us that there's some people on his side from back in the day when he was in the intelligence department, whatever you want to call it, that have come to his aid now to create these riots and all that stuff. And that, you know, that's just a narrative that the ANC is starting to build. And he thinks that you know, people are just taking opportunity, and this hasn't been planned for months. I think guys, what's your do you think that's a possibility as well? We'll start with Big Daddy Liberty on that one.
Look, I'll summarize my point on this. I was just saying this. There is there's a massive propaganda war happening right now. Everybody's trying to control the narrative. Everybody's trying to own the narrative. And it's been rather amusing to see it play out on social media in particular. Because 1 minute this is trending, which suits one faction. The next, this is trending, which says the exact opposite. And who's losing out at the moment is the Zuma faction, and they're losing spectacularly. Because I think you're seeing a broad, even though others might disagree with each other on certain issues, there's a coalescing, or rather a coalition building of just like, you know what, F the Zumas right now. F them all, and as I like to call them, Zuma Inc., because it goes beyond Jacob Zuma himself. It's this whole crooked nexus, you know, of individuals who have grifted off of Zuma and are very frightened right now of seeing their main man being subjected to the rule of law, because they know if this trend continues, they're next. And not even blink twice about it, which is why I think Cyril blinking will be a major mistake. I think Cyril needs to say no. Let the courts do exactly what they're meant to do. Let the law follow due process. And from my side, as the leader of the executive, I will enforce the law. I will make sure SAPS is on the ground ruthlessly, and I use that word in the right context, to enforce the law and order and the rule of law, and to return society to sorry, I thought of the sentence in Zulu. I'll just quickly translate. Return society back to that sense of order, pardon me. I think that's what you're seeing at the moment. And the narratives, the propaganda right now is everybody trying to own and to get ahead of the next guy. So again, not to answer France's point directly, I would argue that that's what you're kind of seeing though. It's almost like this tennis game, this doubles tennis game where, there's two on that side, two on this side, but they might not necessarily get along, but they'll make sure that the opponent loses the game. And that's what I think we're seeing at the moment. But don't be dribbled, but nonetheless.
Yeah, I guess I can get Mark Oppenheimer and Duma. I guess I can get your opinions just very quickly on that one. Is this do you agree with Sichle, or do you think there's something more sinister underneath all of it? Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, look, we know that, let's say if the Zuma faction wanted to plan something, they've had quite a while to plan it. So, Zuma had to know that the Constitutional Court was going to hold him liable for contempt of court, and his hearing was, the original argument was heard in court about 3.5 months ago. So if you wanted to plan something, you've had time for it. I'm not so sure of the kind of chess player that Zuma is. In other words, is it the long-term strategy kind or is it the opportunistic kind? I will say this, which is on this question about what the courts ought to be doing, it's a very difficult situation they find themselves in. There was a letter circulated by the Office of the Chief Justice saying that judges are receiving death threats and judges are being asked to not convene hearings in physical courts, but to do their hearings online. Now, that's something that hasn't been very well reported. It should send shivers down your spine. The only image I can think about when you had the judiciary being terrorized was, in basically narco states, where judges would give their verdicts wearing balaclavas so they couldn't be identified. That's a horrifying thing if you think that it's open season on judges. Wow. Now, you had an incredibly brave judge in the Pietermaritzburg High Court who had to deal with this urgent stay application that was brought by Zuma and argued by Dali Mpofu, because you can imagine the pressure on him to sort of say, just let this guy stay out of prison, until his hearing is heard in the Constitutional Court. And he didn't do it because he followed the law, because he realized, I don't have the power to do that. I cannot interfere with the order of the Constitutional Court. I'm a High Court judge and wrote a very good, compelling judgment on that front. The Constitutional Court as well have been very forthright on this, that on the day of the rescission hearing, the violence had already started. And you do have these subtle implications coming from, the Zuma representatives saying, well, you could do the good thing here, which would be let our guy go, and maybe that'll lead to the violence sort of disappearing. And the Judicial Services Code makes it very clear that judges have to be independent and that they must not submit to the will of political parties, and they must not submit to protesters either. But it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to know that there could be consequences for your actions, for applying the law, which in other words, that there will be thugs who will perform acts of violence. Now, for the court to say, we will not submit ourselves to moral blackmail. If you want to go and perform acts of violence, that's your thing. That's not our fault. You are acting, in breach of the law and in breach of your moral obligations, and we will not change our decisions on the basis of that kind of external pressure. So the court must be lauded for doing that. The court must carry out its duties. It must operate in terms of the law. I'll say a couple of things as well about Dali Mpofu. Now, I think it's quite hard for members of the public to understand what the role is of advocates. We are subject to a rule called the cab rank rule. And the rule basically says that if someone asks you to do work for you, if you have the time and that's your area of specialty and they're willing to pay your fee, you are not allowed to say no. So that means that if Jacob Zuma briefed me and I was not conflicted for some other kind of reason, I would be obliged to run his case. And I would be obliged to run to the best of my ability inside the confines of the law. In other words, you can't lie for the guy. You can't use external mechanisms like threatening violence. You've got to argue the case as you find it. And so I think it's a hard position, to do that as a lawyer when you've got, an enormous amount of pressure on you. What's difficult with Dali is, of course, he wears multiple hats. There's his advocate hat, and there's also, his involvement in the EFF. And so to know what game he's playing at which particular time is not always that straightforward. And I think there's times when there's been a blurring of lines. But I do think you've got to say that, as counsel, you must try and argue the best possible case that you have before you, within the bounds of the law. And, a rescission application was one of those avenues, and in the way that they've run that case, you might not like that he's running that case, and you might think that it is causing all sorts of trouble. But he is, trying to fulfill his duties as a lawyer. And I think the other counsel have done an incredibly good job on that front as well. There have been some very good arguments for the court, and I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what the court decides.
Absolutely. Dumo, thoughts on everything thus far?
Right. On the propaganda theory, I think it is plausible, because I saw a pro-Cyril publication put an article up pointing the finger at a Zuma spy, as the article calls it. And I think that could be part of this propaganda machine. It could be that at this point in time, the Cyril camp is trying to steer everything away from Ramaphosa and rather point it at Zuma. So now they got this article on the Zuma spy. So it could be an attempt in that direction. I also think that Ramaphosa has every reason to also try and take the attention off him without making himself look desperate. So he's got like people within the media that can assist him in doing so. And as Sihle mentioned, there are people that there are these narratives that are flying around. Like, for example, I saw one narrative where, and I think I think this was done by some PR firm or whatever, but it was so cheap. So what happened was they showed looters, and then they showed white looters, and they say, look, there's white looters. Like, everyone's saying they're black. And I was like, come on, man. Guys' businesses are getting burned, and you're worried about the color or the race of the individuals that are looting. And I was just like, this is clearly a cheap attempt to really take the attention of something. Yeah. So there have been these cheap attempts, and I think that some of them have been funny. Some of them have been like, whoa, wow, this is interesting. But yeah, there's so much information going around that I'm not even sure anymore. That's why I just stick to the NDR theory and say, you know what? The ANC has just planned this thing from the beginning. They want this to happen. I mean, I know it sounds a bit like far-fetched at the moment, but there's so much information and we're so close to the situation that anything can go. And as Sihle mentioned, like, there are a lot of things, a lot of theories can be true at the same time. There could be also an issue of opportunism as well and long-term planning, as Mark mentioned. So there's a lot of facts that can play as combinations or permutations, and you can't rule anything out. But because of the propaganda machine, they're going to try add more factors to it that are irrelevant, that can take our attention off what is supposed to be relevant. So yeah,
I think we can all agree that clearly the real culprits behind this are white monopoly capital and the two Jews that are in this room. The Oppenheimers and the Ruperts, the Ingabretis. I publicly apologize. I'm really sorry, guys, for causing all of this.
That's a brilliant one.
Yeah. Look, I tend to actually steer more towards what Duma is saying. This is what the ANC wants. I am in that camp. I do think that even though, and this is going to lead into our next topic. And Mark, by the way, I know you have to leave soon, so you can just pop off when you need to go. But basically, the next topic or theory that I wanted to discuss quickly, and we've kind of been touching on it and tiptoeing around it, but let's now dive into it. And I'm going to put a bit of a disclaimer before. This is just a theory, not saying that this is true. Again, we are theorizing tonight. So this one that is coming out, and I don't know if any of you have heard the voice notes that are going around about this, but there's basically a coup happening, and EFF is possibly behind everything. I honestly, when I spoke to Franz, he said he doesn't believe that that the EFF or any party, for that matter, in South Africa is smart enough to pull off a coup. He says no, this is just people reacting to a situation, and the different parties are taking advantage of the situation, being opportunistic with the situation. Basically, oh wow, this happened. Okay, how can we, start doing that propaganda machine and fighting, and this is an opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. I would tend to agree with him. I also don't think, even though we saw images of Zuma meeting with Cele and Juju, I don't think they've been planning like this is what's going to happen, and then we're going to do this, and then my people are going to do this, and then we'll do this, and then this will force Cyril to pull out the army, and then I'll tweet this very quickly, and then I'll get banned from Twitter. I don't think they planned it out that well. But Mark, seeing as you have to go really quickly, you can give your 2 cents before you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're thinking about coups, I mean, you come from a country where there was one, right?
Yeah.
There was a coup in Egypt, and I think to try and think about what it is to run a successful coup, in other words, that you are able to hold on to power, it's not a simple thing. It would require quite a lot of dissatisfaction with the current regime. I think you've got to be backed by the army, because you've got to maintain it. A lot of coups really are military coups. I think it's quite rare to think about internal party factionalism as a coup. So the question is whether you could imagine the EFF being able to, storm Pretoria and hold on to power. You might have a very short-lived failed coup if something like that happened. I think what you could have is some kind of internal party coup. In other words, let's say a call against, a vote of no confidence against Ramaphosa, and that those that are sympathetic to, let's say, the RAT faction try and vote in, their guy. So that kind of thing, would be a different kind of coup. But I think the idea of, someone being able to externally oust Ramaphosa and take control in the form of the EFF strikes me as unlikely. I think you really would require pretty strong connections with the army and the police to be able to pull that off. Also, the consequences of a coup under those circumstances are severe. That you'd be condemned by the international community. It'd be very hard to govern a country under those conditions. I do think that if you want to be an authoritarian regime, now's not a bad time to do it, because the world is distracted by its own problems. People are sort of dealing with all sorts of, plague blights and economic blights. But I do think if you want to run a country, if you want to take control of a country and want to run it, you don't want to be doing it in a situation of complete and utter isolation.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mark, it is 10 o'clock, so I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And good luck in your other stream, or in your show. Is there anything you want to say before you head off? And for those of you that are tuning in now, or want to know more or want to follow Mark, remember his channel is linked in the description, along with Dumo, Manpatria, and Big Daddy Liberty, also linked below. So please give them a subscribe. Mark, your final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us all today. I think it's important that we have these kind of discussions. I mean, it's been a very grim couple of days. It feels like we're dealing with a rolling apocalypse in South Africa. You've got the plague. You've got, I can't think of a month where you've either had all your power, all your water, all your internet, no army on the streets, and ability to go and sit down at a restaurant. It's a lot for us to endure. And I think it's been a particularly frightening time for people. Yeah. I think what's important is that people recognize that the state has its limitations, that communities need to band together. They need to do the right thing. I think people should be wary about resorting to vigilantism. But I think many people who've been very skeptical about guns are now going to start to rethink that view. The idea that Bekele could come and say you don't get to defend yourself with a private firearm, I think once people have had to stare at the mob, see the whites of their eyes, seeing images of little old ladies carrying AK-47s makes you feel a bit more comfortable. That one way of keeping the marauding attackers away from your family, from your wife and kids, is with your own private firearm. especially under conditions when you think that the police are going to fail you and the army's not going to do a good job. So I think there'll be an enormous pushback against that firearms bill. And I think a lot of people who were quite weary about private firearms ownership will change their minds. I had Peter Boghossian on my show, and his specialty is around changing people's minds, having thoughtful conversations. And I said to him, "What have you changed your mind on?" He said, "For 20 years, I was virulently anti-gun." He said, "I thought anyone who wanted to bear arms was a redneck." And he says, "As soon as the rioting happened in Portland," he said, "I went and I built up an arsenal." Once it sort of hits you where it matters, people start to realize, you might be alone, and if there's not going to be a policeman standing in front of you and an angry mob, you better have a firearm. And I think a lot of people feel that it's a feminist issue as well, that if you're a woman and you have to straddle a very big guy, one way to equal that playing field is to have a firearm. So I think that's the thought that I'll leave you with.
Great. Thank you, Mark, once again for joining us tonight. It's great to have you on the show, and I will get you back as soon as you're available again. Thanks so much. Have a good night. Cool. All right. So I remain with Dumo and Big Daddy Liberty, and we're going to continue the conversation on the theory of what is going on, what is really happening with this SA shutdown. I think we've tackled quite a few things, and we're busy with the idea or theory of a coup that could be happening in South Africa at the moment. Let me also give my opinion on this. I'm on the. I'm not even on the fence with this one. I think I'm sitting in the camp of I won't be surprised if a week from now, 2 weeks from now, it comes out that there was an attempt. I wouldn't be surprised. Am I 100% on that side that there is? Not really. And I see some comments, and then you guys can give your thoughts. So basically, Deborah Oliver saying or asking, surely it is too well orchestrated to be opportunistic, and I think that's a good question to kind of let's see or chew on this one a bit. So Dumo, your opinion on this one?
Right. With regards to the EFF attempting a coup, I don't think they have it in them. I mean, we saw what happened in Brackenfell. I mean, the police beat them with water cannons. So I don't know if they'll be able to go around. And I mean, and that was so symbolic because those water cannons had like some blue dye on it. Yeah. And it happened in the Western Cape, and DA's blue. I think that was all symbolic,
They were trolling.
That's kind of like, yeah.
Man, it was like one of the water in those porta potties. Like literally telling the EFF, "You are shit."
So I don't know. I mean, I think the EFF is a party that is known. It's basically like this breakaway party from the ANC that has a lot of loyal Malema supporters, and I think at the end of the day, if they had to try and attempt something like this, as Mark said, they'll probably need a lot of connections within the police and within the army, and I don't think they have those type of connections to pull off something like that. And if they had to try it with Malema saying "Fighters Unite," I mean, remember he said that so many times, and they ended up being on the back foot. So, look, I mean, I would be surprised, I mean, if they actually pull it off. But at the same time, once you become a president as a result of a coup, what's stopping the next person from overthrowing you, because let's say you have the support of the army and so forth, and you get in. Then 1 year later or 2 years later, the head of the army is like, "Hey, guys, we don't need these EFF people. Let's get them out." And then he kicks them out, So you create a cycle of continued coups, and I think that it's not a good thing. And we don't, and you know how it is in Africa, where a lot of military leaders have become presidents, and that's the last thing that we need, because when they rule, it's just, by decree. And we don't need that right now. So, it's possible, but highly unlikely. I mean, the DA beat them in Western Cape. I think anyone with a decent defense can stop the EFF.
Yeah, Big Day Liberty, before we get to your thoughts, Koketso saying, remember, the EFF lack the requisite intelligence to pull a coup off. If there is a coup, they are definitely not the puppeteer. And once again, Koketso and I had a discussion. We also were, talking about some of this stuff, but I wanted to dive deeper into these theories, so I decided to continue the topic. But please go check out the stream with Koketso from last night. Very interesting discussion with Koketso as well. So yeah, and then Robin Dandelion saying, I don't think it's the EFF, no way. Yeah, again, I wouldn't be surprised, but BDL, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, as I always say, hashtag don't be dribbled. I don't think it's so much a coup as it is a case of sedition. And sedition, remember, its definition is it's conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of the state or a monarch. And I think that's a textbook definition of what we've been seeing for the past few days. I spoke about this on my show, ironically, and I broke it down into the three legs of the Poiki pot or the Zulu pot. The one is, and I won't go into the full detail. If you want to see the full detail of it, just check out the BDL show. But it's essentially this: the first leg is the idea that it's just this, the looting, the chaos, the anarchy. What we've been seeing is just a reaction of poor people frustrated by level 4 lockdown. Level 4 lockdown being the sort of the feather that finally broke the camel's back, But in addition to that, it's been the years of very high levels of economic exclusion, failing schools, unchecked corruption, a racial nationalistic rhetoric from the government, inept and poorly motivated security forces led by people, of course, who don't know what they're doing, and government policy which is unable to address these problems, right? It's been years of that just found itself being came together in a perfect moment where poor people then just said, enough, we'll take to the streets, and it's pure criminality, or rather it's driven purely by frustration, and it's just the pure criminality of looting. That's the one theory, the one leg of it. And I go into detail as to why this is, pros and cons to that argument. The second leg of the Poiki pot is the notion that, as I said, sedition, looting and chaos incited by a political elite, in this particular instance, Zuma Inc. The likes of Abo Duduzane Zuma, his son, and Duduzile Sambuka Zuma, his daughter, who have, again, massive followings on social media and have been inciting over the past few days this very violence, tacitly on the one hand approving of it, as there have been flare-ups by the Zumites on the street, and of course calling for it in others. I mean, the evidence is now coming out of that being a slightly coordinated social media and media campaign on their side. Again, what I was talking about earlier on of narratives and propaganda, trying to beat each other to it. Then there's the third leg of the Zulu pot or the Poiki pot, and it's linked to the second, and that's the idea that in addition to there being a seditious, or rather, pardon me, in addition to there being a political elite, Zuma Inc., who incite this sort of behavior, there's also a third element, or a linked element, of actual operatives who are loyal to Jacob Zuma, who have been acting on the sedition and using the looting and the chaos as cover for more targeted seditious behavior, targeted attacks on infrastructure, both in the private sector and public, aimed at destabilizing, at the very least making the Ramaphosa government look bad. Let me be precise and specific on this third leg, because it relates to the question. In this particular regard, what we've seen is, in addition to there being looting of shop fronts and the like, there seems to have been a coordinated attempt to stagger this in phases. It first began with looting shop fronts, malls, shops in your neighborhood, strip malls, a complete wanton disregard for people's private property rights in that regard. People didn't give a flying fudge. They just walked in, saw what they liked, took it. And then it progressed almost as if by design to attacking the next level of the supply chain in particular, which is warehousing and distribution centers. In Durban, for example, we saw scenes of the game distribution center being ransacked, quite literally, by a horde of people, many of whom were bussed in or taxied in to come do this. And I shared a video clip of that in today's episode. Again, lending credence to the idea that someone is orchestrating this in some way or shape. And that the aim isn't necessarily a coup, but definitely sedition. And the money is behind it, and operatives who clearly have the experience, who might be, as Dumo brought up from that News 24 article, maybe former spooks, SSA agents, for example, this Mr. Goma, I call him Mr. not to be respectful, but just because I forgot his first name. This Mr. Goma, who is alleged, or rather is said to have been a former spy for the SSA turned ambassador to Japan. And he's seen as suspect number one by the state at the moment as to being behind the seditious behavior. As I said, what lends credence to the coup theory is the idea that it's been so focused and almost guided. So it began at the shop fronts, moved to DCs and warehousing, and almost invariably also then moves to a third phase, which is the very element that lubricates the supply chain, which is logistics. What did we see? We saw the burning of trucks on the N3 in the Moy Plaza, for example. Bring it back to Durban. We saw the almost wanton destruction of tankers in particular, shooting out their tires, preventing them from going out. And one step further, even in terms of the attack, as I began this rant, on the public and private infrastructure that serves society, they've gone after the Sapref oil refinery. Sapref, of course, being a conglomerate of 2 or 3 oil companies, Shell, BP, and I think Engen. So that one refinery produces oil products or products from oil for those 3 companies. This company was obviously Sapref, that is, was forced to shut down, or rather declare what's called force majeure. I might be butchering the pronunciation. We've lost the lawyer. He would have helped me with that.
No, you got it right.
But what am I pointing out here, guys? What am I pointing out here? There is clearly some form of staggered, seemingly planned or seemingly orchestrated attempt to destroy and disrupt a society. It might not be for the purposes of a coup necessarily, because as you guys rightly pointed out, you'd need the army, you'd need the police, and blah blah blah. But it's definitely seditious behavior that we're seeing, and it's using the anarchy, or I should stop saying anarchy, or all the anarchists get pissed off at me in the comment section. But it's using the chaos, therefore, as cover, as concealment for what is the real targeted attacks. So I spoke of the private sector infrastructure, for example, being attacked, malls, DCs, and various institutions, private institutions that lubricate that system. There's also been a concerted attempt at attacking public infrastructure. For example, in Pietermaritzburg, a water treatment facility was petrol bombed and attacked. That was covered on Newsroom Africa. The cell phone networks have reported about 100 of their cell phone towers have had either some form of sabotage, destruction, or the stealing of batteries. If I bring it here to Gauteng, sorry, I know I'm waffling here, but I want to build this case. And if I bring it here to Gauteng, community radio stations in particular have reported that they've been almost not in the name of pillaging, but just sabotage of their facilities. Reports of that from West Side Radio. I can go down the line in terms of these. So if you put this all together, and no, you don't have to have a tinfoil hat and like that meme of the guy who stands in front of the whiteboard with the red lines and stuff.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to be that guy. There you go. You don't have to, yeah, you don't have to be that guy, but you can definitely be the guy who's able to piece together and see, a trend in all of this, in and amongst the chaos, which is, it uses the chaos as concealment. And you could maybe make the argument that there is maybe credence to the idea that there could be operatives who are linked to the guys who incite the stuff, who are political elites, the likes of who do design and blah blah blah, but actually enact it and like they enact that incitement, if you will, and hide behind the chaos of maybe what could be ordinary people just looting because they're frustrated and they're poor. That is a theory. That is a theory, and it has observable evidence to lend credence to it. But in many events, as a final gasp, the state has to play what is the one responsibility of the state, which is to render law enforcement, to uphold law and order, and of course to protect life, liberty, and property rights. That's the key area in which Ramaphosa, if he wants to escape and survive this, has to show himself as to being a strong hand in that regard.
Big Day Liberty, I have to say, like, I think I'm more in line with what your thoughts are with this in terms of a coup, because Deborah did say don't coup attempts overrun major radio stations, boots out army, etc. And you just addressed all those that point. Like, yes, there are infrastructures being destroyed, but it's more opportunistic, and maybe that is also a little bit more in the moment kind of a thing. Okay, let's go after that. Maybe there is a bit of direction, but in terms of a coup, which again we've established very importantly, we need the army, we need the police. When it comes to the police side of things, again, Zuma did have a meeting with Sele, so I don't know. Maybe there's something there, but I don't know. There's a lot of information that we don't have, and there's a lot of information that we do have, and it is up to the public and the people to try and get as much information as possible, and try and figure out and navigate this crazy world that we live in at the moment.
Just a quick correction. Remember, I'm not arguing that this is so much a coup. Then I'm actually saying it's sedition.
Yes.
It is a very distinct difference. A coup is the violent overthrow of the state. In other words, you, the individual involved, are looking to replace the current state and status quo and become the power broker, the wielder of state power using violent means. Sedition is the almost, I wouldn't say opposite, but it's almost a more nefarious way. It's almost a conduct and a speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of the state. So I don't think it's so much a coup than it is the attempt to create an environment where whoever's doing this is hoping the people will be the ones who then take on the state, and that they then come in later as beneficiaries of that. That's why someone like Julius Malema, you've got to be very careful of. He'll speak only insofar as it benefits him. So he's not speaking in condemnation of the violence and the destruction, and whether it's the Zuma camp or the Ramaphosa camp, because he cares about people's lives or the black lives that he claims to stand for. No, he only speaks insofar as answering the question for himself of how do I benefit from this? How do I, when the elements are done fighting, I don't want to be the grass that has been spoken of in that idiom. He wants to be the one who then comes in and says, okay, cool, they killed each other off, I'm now in charge. So again, that'll be my 2 cents, if I can use your expression, Joe, in that particular instance, because you've got a dangerous situation here where there are competing narratives and some who are willing to action those narratives. And that's that dangerous small cohort that I speak of, who are hiding or using the riotous behavior, the chaos, as concealment for what they're really doing, which seems to be very targeted and almost incremental in its nature.
Agreed. The title of this stream is what is really happening in this SAShutdown, and I think exploring these theories, like we said in different parts of this stream, there's truth to some of them. I think each theory has its extreme version of it, and I don't think, as you guys have said, and I will agree on this one, I think there's a truth to all of them. But I am still on the side of this has everything to do with the elections. Whether it is to make Cyril Ramaphosa look bad, whether it's to try and create more power for Zuma somehow in the ANC, whether it's like, for example, putting NDZ in power, whether it's to, I don't know, for another party to take over instead of the ANC, just generally make ANC look bad and then someone else takes over, a coalition, whatever the case, I do think that this has everything to do with the elections. That's my personal opinion. That's what I'm sticking with. So very quickly, because we're running out of time, and I really want to. There's one question that I really want to get to, which will be a nice way to end off. But after this discussion, how do you guys feel? Briefly, like what I just said, I gave a brief. This is where I'm sitting at the moment. This is my camp. Where are your guys' camps? Duma, we'll start with you.
Well, yeah. After this is all said and done, I still hold the theory that I think this is more of a push towards the National Democratic Revolution. I think it's a great opportunity. Well, now when I say great opportunity, I'm not saying it is great. I'm just saying that if they really want to use this crisis, I think the ANC can use this to push the National Democratic Revolution because of the jobs that will be lost and also the supply chains that will be destroyed as well, which will then enable them to step into rebuild the economy, obviously to implement their socialist ideals. And as a result of that, more people become reliant on the state, and therefore they will be able to control the economy. So that's my theory.
All right, BDL, very briefly, your theory?
Yeah, no, I do think that there's definitely a strong element of that. And a cabal that is licking their lips at the prospect of what society looks like at the end of this. More job losses, more unemployed people, more dependence, potential dependence on the state, and a vilifying, established, of course, through the culture of looting, of the so-called white monopoly capital businesses. That's why you've been hearing, for example, a lot of rhetoric in these various WhatsApp voice notes of people saying things like, well, don't loot black businesses, they'll say. You've got to go for those white supremacist and white monopoly capital businesses because, as soon as we get rid of those businesses, everything will be hunky-dory, which is code and which is code, of course, in commie speak for everybody will be dependent on the state. Including those very black businesses which leech off of the government. Because if you're not in the favor of the political elites who are ruling, then you don't get the state contracts, especially because those state contracts come in the guise of being apportioned or given to black businesses in particular. So I do think there's an element of that. But I would end off, my last gasp would be this. I don't care what is actually happening right now. I know it sounds like a weird thing to say at the moment, because my concern, and I made this crystal clear on my show earlier on, is how you respond as the average South African, what you do in this moment, how, if you haven't been doing it before, and it takes a moment of crisis like this one for you to be galvanized, into action, then so be it. But what is that action? It's 3 distinct phases. Number 1, a unity of purpose. You must build a unity of purpose amongst yourself and your neighbors and the community in which you live in. If you don't know your neighbor, by God, tomorrow, cook a little bit of extra dinner and walk over to them and say, hi, this is a casserole from us, Ngobe says. We've never met since we moved in here, but now you know us. We're a family of 4. I've got 2 kids. They go to the same primary school as your kids, blah, 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 you name it. And you ask your neighbor, tell me about you. Tell me about your family. Because from this moment on, I have your back. Whatever happens in this neighborhood, whatever happens in this community, here is my number. You call it, I will have your back. And I would hope, dear neighbor, that you will have mine. That is unity that I often talk about. That is a unity of purpose. Get to know your damn neighbors. Get to know the people on your street. It is only after you get to know them, it is only after you build that unity that I speak of, you can move on to number 2, organizing. Organizing is exactly that. You know your neighbors, you've built a rapport with them, they know you, they trust you, they literally trust you with their lives and their kids. Then you can begin to organize those people. You know them, you can say things like, well, what are the skill sets we have in this neighborhood? As an example, we've got a doctor down the road, a paramedic across me, a lawyer from me, which will be useful. We've got a police officer, you name it, right? You are able to now organize those people and say, guys, with these skills that we have in this neighborhood, with the men that we have in this community, how about we then, number 3, mobilize each other into defending our families, defending this area, and beyond this moment of crisis. It doesn't just have to be in response to the crisis, but once you know who's who in the zoo, you can then actually mobilize your community to defend your life, liberty, and your property rights. That is the only way in which you can do it. A unity of purpose, organizing each other and mobilizing each other to act. And now you can suddenly have a mobilizing of extra resources. The private security companies who various residents pay, now they can organize because you guys are organized as a community. You can pool those resources. Who are the gun owners, the legal, responsible, proficient gun owners in the area? Let's get those guys together, form a community patrol where, we can don some bibs, have some flashlights, nice toolkit around the belt, and of course your firearm, whether it's a pistol or a rifle, I don't care. Both will serve the purpose that I'm speaking of defending your family and defending your neighborhood. That's the magic potion, if you will. And the BDL challenge I set on my channel today, and if you don't mind, Joe, I'm going to set it here today, is for you, dear South African. Step out of your comfort zone right now. Not out of fear of what's happening in Shutdown SA and the looting, the violence. No, do not do it out of fear. Do it out of purpose, where you'll go, meet your neighbor, build that unity. From that unity, you'll organize the people in your neighborhood. And from that organizing, you can then mobilize to defend life, liberty, and property.
I feel like that deserves a round of applause. Perfectly said, and you kind of jumped ahead there, because I was going to end the show with saying, like, what should we do now? Because that was a question that was given out earlier. What comes next? And someone, Riddell, also asking, like, I don't like violence, just sex and violence. The saxophone. Where does the current situation leave pawpaws like me, not being part of the legislation as an independent musician and those alike? Basically asking the question, what do we do now? And I think BDL, you knocked it right out of the park. I agree with you 100%. Get to know your neighbors. Rely on your community. Most importantly, BDL has been on his channel showing how communities in South Africa, small communities in South Africa, have been already doing this to protect themselves from what is inevitably, and as we're seeing now, a state failure. For those of you who are listening to this, who are still on the fence about state failure, it is happening. It is happening right now, right in front of you, right before your eyes. What is happening now is definitely a problem that has been a serious problem with the ANC. 27 years of poor governance is what has led to this past week, and who knows when it's going to end. I hope people theorize by the weekend. Some say it's going to be even longer. I hope it ends soon, but understand this: we are in serious trouble. When these riots are over, it's going to be catastrophic on our economy, on the way we do things in life. And be prepared for what the ANC is going to try and twist, and the propaganda machine is going to move, and we saved you. Don't fall for it. The people and the heroes of these riots were the people that stood up. They got their community together. They helped the SAPs. They provided ammo for the SAPs. They were there even past curfew, and helping to protect their local community and businesses. And we're seeing images of this everywhere. So I agree with you 100%, BDL. People, get out there, get to know your neighbors. I'm going to make my neighbors some chocolate chip cookies, and I'm going to send it to them tomorrow. Dumo, do you have any thoughts? What do people do now? What advice could you give to people? What should people be doing right now?
I don't think there's anything more that I can add to what Sihle said. I think It's just that we have to get out of our comfort zone. We have to be actively involved in the communities that we're in. One way in which you can do that is also to assist organizations, civil society organizations. I think that also is a good way of doing it. I do understand that some people will say, "Oh, but I can't really mobilize and go out in the community because I got bills to pay. I got to do this and that and that and that." Well, I mean, if you don't have time, you can donate to people who do have time. So look for a civil society organization that you can assist. There are so many out there. Just look them up. You will find it and donate to them. And also, keep tabs on what's going on. Donations can only go so far. And at some point, you're going to have to mobilize with your fellow countrymen and work together in protecting your private property and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, that's really my last words.
Fantastic. And I also want to add, for those of you who, I didn't link this channel in the description, but I believe Franz Corneille was telling me that CRA is going to release an interesting video tomorrow morning about the effects of these riots and how it's going to affect the economy. And I strongly suggest that you guys go check it out. I'm definitely going to watch it tomorrow morning. They release a video Monday to Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning. Very interesting stuff. It's a think tank, CRA, Center for Risk Analysis. So go check them out. Okay, boys. Thank you so much, guys. And again, thanks to Mark, but thank you as well for giving up your time tonight and discussing these theories with me. Again, I still sit on the idea that, ANC is going to do whatever they need to do to stay in power. So that's why I say it's all about elections. And I guess, all the other little theories kind of fall into that, and some truths from every theory kind of falls under that umbrella. So, yeah, thank you guys so much. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, I have linked all these guys' YouTube channels in the description, so please give them a subscribe if you haven't yet already. And yeah, guys, I will see you on the social media and everywhere else. You guys are more than welcome to join me again, and you can give your just tell people where to find you and all that stuff. BDL, you can go first.
Yeah, very briefly, find me on any of your social media platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, of course. And, every Wednesday at 7 p.m., the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And, of course, on Sunday at 8 p.m., Liberty and Friends, where we round up the news week that was and give you great analysis on there. Look out for the Mazakele campaign, which I'll be launching, which will see me traveling around the country, going community to community to, on the one hand, bring you content of those South Africans who are doing exactly what I spoke about, the unity, organizing and mobilizing, and are doing things for themselves. Mazakele being a Zulu word, or build it yourself. So I'll bring you that in a special series, which I'm currently just fundraising for at the moment. And last but not least, sorry. Oh, there we go. I was fighting it off the whole time. Last but not least, you'll find me, of course, on vlogs that I drop every now and then. Joe, thank you very much. Super appreciated.
Cheers, buddy. Dumo, where can people find you? And yeah.
All right. So we have a website, manpatria.com. So at Manpatria, you will find all the shows that we do. We have the Manpatria podcast, which is released every Monday at 7 o'clock. Really cool discussions. We also have another show called the Freeman Series, where I interview people from time to time. And we also have the Austrian Perspective, where I give the news from an Austrian perspective. So please, just go to manpatria.com and you'll find everything there.
Fantastic. Once again, thank you guys so much. For those of you that are still watching, thank you so much. Thank you for all the super chats. It's greatly appreciated. It really supports the channel. If you're watching this after the fact, go to the link in the description where you can support my channel monthly. It'd be greatly appreciated. Other than that, I'll be back tomorrow evening for a late night chat. That's a very chill chat. We make fun of things. We have it's basically a bunch of comedians talking a lot of cuck. So join us if you want. It's a lot of fun. Other than that, if I don't see you then, stay safe. I mean that now more than ever. Stay safe. Be kind to one another. And I'll see you at the next one. Cheers, guys.